Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. There are times when you've had a little bit too much wine where you should not make videos. However, I'm a rebel, and so I'm going to make a video. And it's going to be based on what is this YouTube thing all about. Now, there are many YouTube people making videos, some of which I call friends, and we all do our thing. But what is that thing? What are we trying to do? Now, there are those that show pretty blooms, and that's all they ever do. And that fulfills a need, because there are lots of people coming into YouTube to see what orchids are all about. And that's what they want to see. They don't want to see troublesome plants. They don't want to see roots going manky. They don't want to see plants failing. What they want to see is pretty blooms. So we get back to that pretty blooms must have. And I think all of us that do YouTube channels are in that category. We don't want to see our plants failing. We want to see success. But when there is not success, when things go wrong, when things start to fail, what have we got? What we've got is the best situation there is on YouTube, providing we have a solution. It's all very well saying, my orchid's dying. But if you don't know why, what are you providing to the YouTube community? You're not providing a lot. However, if you have a plant that's failing and you know why, and you post that on YouTube, you are a star, because you have now told everybody about something that can go wrong and what you can do to put it right. And to me, that's what YouTube is all about. It's not about just pretty blooms. It's the YouTube community for orchid people getting together to basically say, this is what works and this is what doesn't, and why. But it's not just that, because that is simple. I had a comment the other day saying, how do I look after oncidiums? Well, I could say a care guide to oncidiums is not a comment. It's a video. How do you look after oncidiums and they're into generics? Well, let's have a think. First of all, where do you live? And given where you live, which would determine your day lengths, your seasons or lack of seasons. Some people live in areas where seasons are almost irrelevant. And some people live in areas where seasons are really dominant. Well, when you're asking for how to look after something, well, let's have a think about where you are. What part of the world are you in? Where do you grow? Are you growing on a windowsill? Are you growing in the home? Are you growing in a cellar with grow lights? Are you growing in a conservatory? Here is a conservatory. Are you growing in a greenhouse sat down the middle of the garden? Without all of this information, how the hell can you give a care guide? So those that do need to think again. And that's my view, because I cannot tell you how to grow oncidiums. I cannot tell you how to grow cattleya, because without the information of where, when and why, that information would be inaccurate, I'll say. That's the polite version. So we've got to think about what we're up to on YouTube. And everybody who has a YouTube channel that offers advice, they say that with power becomes great responsibility. And that to me is important. I will not offer advice unless I prerequisite it with this is what I do in my environment. However, if you haven't got an environment like this advice could be useless. Not only useless, it could actually be wrong. Which is why I don't do care guides very often. And it is geared up to that. It is simple as that. Every single person has their own growing environment, and it may only be subtly different to somebody else's, but it could be drastically different to somebody else's. And if you live in Florida and all your plants are hanging off of trees in your garden, the advice you give to somebody in the north of England or in Canada or in New Zealand would not be relevant. And if you don't make those adjustments to your advice, the advice is not that good. But what's most important is for those people who follow the YouTube channels to know that difference. So when somebody's saying how they grow something in this environment, in this particular locale, part of the world, and all that sort of stuff, with the various seasons or lack of seasons, all that sort of stuff, are they giving you personally good advice? And this is the advice that I can give, is take the advice with a pinch of salt and look into it. Is this person giving you personally advice that suits you? So somebody living in the south of Australia, New Zealand, blah, my mouth won't work. That's what happens when you have too much wine and then do a video. No apologies. This is my channel. And if I've had too much to drink and I come out with a load of cobblers, that's up for you to determine, not me. Anyway, if you live in the Philippines, you live in the Mediterranean area, or you live in Canada, or you live in Florida, or you live in the South Americas, all of these places have their own particular climates and environments. And within that, you get the subtleties. So yes, I live in Mexico and I grow orchids in a greenhouse. Do you think your greenhouse is the same as somebody living in Florida? Or somebody living in Cyprus? Or somebody living in South Africa? Or somebody living in the Philippines, Myanmar? Somebody living in southern China? Is that greenhouse the same thing? Because if you pick it up and dump it in any one of those environments, it's now different. So it's an advice from me to YouTubers. When you offer advice, offer it selectively. Offer it on the grounds that this is where you live, this is your environment, this is how you grow, and this is what you do. Don't offer it as this is what you should do. Because fundamentally, I just believe that is totally wrong. Anyway, I will admit I've had a little bit too much wine tonight on the grounds that circumstances have gone wrong during the day and I got a bit miffed and I decided to have a bit more wine than I normally do. And on top of that, I then decided, because I had too much wine, to do a video, which is almost dark now. Anyway, for all the people who watch YouTube videos, bear this in mind. Where does the person making the video live? Are they accepting those environmental conditions into the advice they give? And in addition to that, what do they grow and where do they grow it? And you, as YouTube viewers, have to analyse this. If you want to take good advice, you've got to do a bit of work. Because, like me, in the UK, on the south coast of England, United Kingdom as some people like to call it, but it's England at the end of the day, I've got a certain environment. I've got weather conditions. I've now got 3 or 4 days of miserable weather where I won't get much heat in my grow room. Other people at this time of year will be getting good weather and good conditions, and some people that are growing outside and all their plants are hanging off their trees are getting their conditions. Their advice is not the same. And all I can do is advise people who watch YouTube channels to think about what you're watching. Where is this person living? What are their growing conditions? What is their environment? And is the advice they may give suitable for you? Or does it need you to make some fine adjustments? So for instance, if I give advice on what happens in the south coast of the UK, what adjustments would need to be made for somebody living in Yorkshire, or somebody living in Scotland, or somebody living in Norway? Yeah, let's move over to the continent, you know, the EU. But you see what I mean? We live in an environment on YouTube that offers advice. Now, some YouTube channels do, here are pretty blooms, and that's what they do. That's not advice, that's entertainment. And I love it. I love watching those channels. Here are my blooms. Here are my latest purchases. This is the latest stuff I've got in. And that's not advice, that's entertainment. That's one point. But there are channels that offer advice. Take that advice subjectively. It's important. It's good advice. I'm not having a go. I'm saying it's good advice, but it's subjective. Where is it? What is the advice aimed at? You see what I'm getting at? Now, I've always tried on my channel to offer advice subjectively. It doesn't always work, but basically at the end of the day, this is where I live, this is my environment, you're looking at it, this is the grow room, this is where everything happens, and this is where my channel is based, even though it's getting dark. What is the time? Oh God, it's time I settled down in the chair for a snooze. Actually, there's snooker on, so no snoozing tonight. But you see what I'm getting at? It's you have to be subjective. You have to look at the advice being given based on what the advice is based on. That might sound daft, but just get your thinking caps on. I would hate for me to give advice to somebody that then was actioned on, and as a result their plants failed. I would feel so sad. So I avoid that at all costs. So when somebody puts a comment on a video and says, how do I look after oncidiums? You're not going to get an answer. Because until I know where you grow, how you grow, what your growing environment is like, I'm not even going to think about offering advice, because I can't. That's the point. And that's why I always have a go at these old books and ancient scribes and stuff like that offer advice like stupid statements like feed weekly. What a stupid statement. What happens if at the end of that week your plant is still soaking wet because you've got short days and cold temperatures? You're now going to water it again with even more feed? How stupid a statement is that? And you know what I'm like? I do not like those old books and those ancient scribes, because they're based on averages and they do not consider the multiple environments that people grow in. I'd like to think that we're coming up, we're in 2021 now, we have an internet, we have YouTube, we have Facebook, we have all those other things like Twitter and stuff like that I don't get involved with. There's only so much I can do during the day. But at the end of the day, the advice is there. But what you have to do is try and analyse what is good advice, what is sound advice, what is based on good growing principles, and what is nothing more than pretty blooms must have. And I'm not having a go at any channels in particular, but when somebody offers advice based on their own growing environment and doesn't make it subjective, in other words, this is what I do, it may not work for you, they're pushing their luck. And as this advice gets more and more widely known and people become more savvy to it, they're not going to do as well as perhaps they'd like to think. So if you run a YouTube channel, make sure you are subjective. And whenever you offer advice, offer it in those terms. This is what I do based on where I live, how I grow, and how things are going, and what my environment is, and what my growing media is, and what my humidity levels are, etc., etc. And those number of variables are infinite. Therefore, no one person can give you that specific advice. That's the important bit. So take it with a pinch of salt, analyse it, look at what advice you're getting. I mean, I've read some brilliant books on orchid care based on Florida. What use of that is that to somebody living on the south coast of the UK? I grow my orchids on trees. I go round with a hose each day. And my temperatures are this, and my humidity is this. Blah, blah, blah. It's useless to me living on the south coast of the UK. So go very careful what advice you accept. It's up to you. It's not up to the person giving it. That's with their own conscience. But it's up to you to think about, what advice am I getting? What care guides am I getting? And does it work for me, where I live, in my environment, and how I grow? And eventually you will back up and you will think, I'm probably better analysing this myself and actually working out what I need to do based on a very general set of advice, and come to a conclusion that's based on logic, perhaps a bit of science, and go with that. And the bottom line is what I'm doing working? Because if it is, you don't need anybody else's advice. Let it go. It's all very well listening to it and watching it on YouTube, but is it important? And the answer is, if your plants are doing okay and they're coming into bloom at their regular times and all this, that and the other, why do you need somebody else's advice? When things go wrong, you look to the internet and you look for things to help you out. But be very careful which advice you take, because it can be not suitable to you. It's not wrong, but it's not right for you. And that's, it's so difficult to know that bit. It's so difficult to know, is this advice suitable to me? Or is it advice that would suit loads and loads of other people, but not me? That's a skill. That's a skill set that you will get as time goes on. You can't expect to have that first thing. If you bought your first orchid 6 months ago, those skill sets are not there yet. Anyway, I've got snooker to watch, and this is what endearingly is called a rant, and it's getting darker and darker as time goes on. So take care. Take care with what advice you follow, and try and work out, step backwards and say, is this advice good for me? And if you live in Norway, Scandinavia, whatever those, Scotland, Northern Ireland, all these sort of places, high latitudes, the top end of Canada, Alaska, places like that, if somebody in Florida is giving you advice on how to grow your orchids, is it suitable for you? and vice versa. Yeah? Think of it the other way round. Doesn't always work backwards, it can work forwards as well. So think about the advice you get. Try and analyse what that advice is based on, where it's come from. Do you live in South Africa and your advice is given on the basis of growing Deesas? That's probably good advice because that's where they grow. So have a think about what you're up to. And well, we live in a community. We try and share our advice. We try and share everything about our orchid hobby, how we go about it, what works, what doesn't work. But if you say something has failed on YouTube, you have to say why, or why you think, because you might not be right, but you have to have a stab at it. So if plants start to fail for some reason or another, have a good stab at why you think that's happening, because that could be so useful for other people. So useful. And if you've had problems in the past and you've changed something and it worked, for goodness sake, let us know. That is so important. We're a community. We share our knowledge. So when something changes and it works, let us know, because it could be so important for other people. If you think you're the only one with a problem, you need to think again. See you next time. Now I'm going to go and have another glass of wine and then I'll fall over on the floor, I expect. If I can make statements and try and get a cohesive conversation going with the amount of wine I've had, then I'm quite pleased with myself. I would suggest you don't do this. It's not the best of things to do on YouTube, but I felt it was important to tell people that YouTube is a source of information, but it's subjective. You must analyse where that information is coming from, what it's based on, and does it suit you. And quite honestly, I hate to say this, but a lot of the time it won't. See you next time.